Hey guys, tonight we marvel at a colossal vanity project, one sultan, one impossible dream, and zero actual purpose. The moon is bright, casting long silver strokes across a calm body of water. You hear soft waves lap against ancient stones, and in the distance, something strange juts out from the shoreline. A half-drowned pillar. A few moss-covered blocks. Some seagulls holding a very official meeting. It's not a ruin exactly. It's more like a monument to indecision, a memorial to a plan that never had a chance. You're looking at the remains of the world's most pointless bridge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the banks of the Golden Horn in the mid-19th century Ottoman Empire, just outside Constantinople. Behind you, the vast skyline bristles with domes, spires, and smoke. You smell cloves and coal, feel silk brushing past your sleeves, and hear distant prayers bleeding into street music. You also hear a rumor, the kind that buzzes from lips to ears like a sleepy bee. The Sultan is planning something big. Bigger than a palace. Bigger than war. A bridge. Now, bridges are usually practical things. They connect places, people, markets. But this one? Not so much. Because here's the twist, it doesn't really go anywhere. The two locations it connects are already easily accessible by ferry or walking paths. And more importantly, they have no significant trade route between them. You could stand on one end of this proposed structure and shout to the other side, if you had decent lungs and a megaphone. But Sultan Abdulmecid I isn't thinking about practicality. He's thinking legacy. Marble. Grandeur. The kind of grandeur that makes future historians choke a little on their tea. He's a man in his 20s with a mustache that seems to believe in its own divine right. Crowned in 1839, he's inherited an empire trying desperately to modernize. Schools, railways, newspapers, it's all part of his Tanzimat, or reform movement. But deep down, you suspect this isn't really about reform. This is about becoming unforgettable. And here's where it gets even more bizarre. You know that bridge you saw at the beginning, the one crumbling in the moonlight? That was supposed to be just the first in a whole line of megalomaniac projects. There were plans for a floating palace. A gold leaf observatory. A heated road, no joke. You're basically watching a man build his dream journal out of actual stone. Historians still argue whether Abdulmecid truly believed in the bridge's necessity or if he simply feared being outshone by European rulers throwing lavish public works around like wedding confetti. Some say he was inspired by a real economic strategy, others whisper about an astrologer who told him to build toward the water or drown in your doubts. Either way, the Sultan is now holding royal meetings where the phrase crocodile-resistant footing is being used unironically. And what's most striking is how unstriking the location is. The Golden Horn, while picturesque, already has crossing points. There's no treacherous ravine, no howling gorge. Just a placid, fairly manageable stretch of water. The modern-day equivalent would be building a mile-long skywalk between two adjacent cafes because you like the idea of elevation. You watch from the shadows as royal advisors nod solemnly, trying to disguise their confusion. One coughs nervously when the Sultan describes the bridge being lined with fountains that sing at twilight. Another scribbles furiously when the Sultan declares the stone must be imported from a quarry only accessible by sled. Oh, and the name? He calls it the Bridge of Harmony. Which, frankly, would be cute if it didn't sound like the title of a mid-tier romance novel set in a string quartet. A mainstream historical detail you probably didn't expect? Around this same time, Britain is knee-deep in the Industrial Revolution, pumping steam through every pipe and printing scandal in every tabloid. Meanwhile, your Sultan is commissioning a bridge where architects are required to consult dream interpreters. Still, no one says no to the Sultan. Not yet. You can't help but admire the audacity. The sheer, unfiltered gall of turning a minor stream into the canvas for your personal Sistine Chapel of stone and steel. It's the kind of madness that makes you wonder, what would you build, if no one could stop you? And then the plans arrive. Delivered by silk-wrapped messengers with expressions that say, I don't understand it either. The city buzzes. Architects sigh. And far away in Europe, one man receives a letter from the Sultan that will drag this project into an even stranger chapter. But you don't know about that yet. You're still here, listening to the gulls, smelling the salt, watching the moonlight glint off scaffolding that shouldn't exist. You shift your weight on the shoreline, realizing this isn't a bridge to somewhere. This is a bridge to someone. You explore the glittering, power-drunk reign of Sultan Abdulmecid I, where ego and empire tangle like silk threads in a storm. You drift into the palace now, into Topkapi, or maybe Dolmabahce, depending on which day the Sultan is feeling more rococo. The halls are too wide, the carpets too soft, and there are chandeliers the size of rental cars swinging above your head like they're daring gravity to try something. You pass walls covered in mother-of-pearl, gilded furniture that squeaks if you look at it wrong, and guards who carry swords that double as mirrors. In the middle of this velvet and gold opera lives Sultan Abdulmecid I, lounging on divan, sipping rosewater, and contemplating eternity. He is not what you call fearsome. Not in the scimitar-waving, mustache-twirling, bolt of lightning from the minaret kind of way. He is soft-eyed, smooth-skinned, dressed more like a Parisian poet than a battlefield tyrant. But his presence hums with a different sort of danger, the kind that comes from absolute power wrapped in teenage indecision. Think prom king with the treasury. His reign begins with the Tanzimat, a sweeping reform program meant to haul the Ottoman Empire into the modern world by the elbow. Postal services, equal rights for non-Muslims, state schools, railroads. If it exists in Europe, he wants it in Istanbul yesterday. He even bans the fez for about 10 minutes, until realizing that enforcing hat policy is trickier than expected. Historians still argue whether the Tanzimat was a genuine leap forward or just a glittery distraction. You see a bit of both as you wander the palace. One chamber holds blueprints for a medical college, the next, a life-sized mechanical swan that spits perfume every hour on the hour. Priorities. Abdulmecid's obsession with the West is undeniable. He adores French etiquette, reads English novels in translation, and even tries to introduce the tuxedo to court dress code, an initiative that lasts until his vizier looks like a grumpy magician and refuses to leave his quarters. But the Sultan presses on, determined to dress his empire in modernity like it's the latest Parisian coat. And this is how a bridge idea gets legs. One night, after a banquet where the desserts are shaped like architectural landmarks, yes, you eat a tiny sugar Hagia Sophia, the Sultan is struck by a thought. What if he could outdo the Romans? Or the Persians? Or even, dare he dream it, the British? The bridge, he declares to his courtiers, shall be a symbol, not of utility, but of vision, of unshakable will. The same way Louis XIV had Versailles, Abdulmecid would have a really inconvenient bridge. You might be thinking, wouldn't the Sultan have more pressing things to do? Well, yes. There's a war brewing. The Crimean one, to be exact. Also, internal dissent, failing provinces, a treasury with less coin and more moth. But when you're a 20-something with a divine mandate and a massive sweet tooth, you're not exactly budgeting your attention wisely. Plus, the Sultan has courtiers who know how to keep his ego fluffed like a down pillow. They murmur things like visionary, immortal legacy, and your nose looks especially symmetrical today. And that's how a dream slips from fantasy to blueprint. The first lines are sketched not on parchment, but on an embroidered napkin during dessert. Cherry syrup stains the corners. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the empire simmers. Janissaries, recently disbanded, grumble in taverns. Tax collectors squeeze farmers like pomegranates. The streets of Constantinople churn with gossip, soot, and foreign diplomats sniffing for opportunity. The empire is staggering, like a dancer who's memorized the steps but forgot the rhythm. Still, the Sultan builds. He commissions not one, but 2 new palaces, because obviously, a man of vision needs options. He throws grand balls where violins sob in minor keys while diplomats spin polite lies like cotton candy. One British envoy calls the Ottoman court a marvelous opera of delusion. You suspect he meant it as a compliment. There's also this quirky side note. The Sultan collects clocks. Hundreds of them. They fill entire rooms, ticking and chiming in chaotic unison, like time itself is trying to send him a message. Possibly something like, hey man, maybe focus on governance. But no! The bridge continues haunting his imagination. It becomes a fixation. He begins slipping it into conversation the way others might mention their weekend hike or sourdough recipe. At a state dinner, he proposes lighting the entire span with oil lamps shaped like lilies. At a religious ceremony, he asks whether the bridge can include a prayer alcove halfway across. One guest swears he once heard the Sultan mumbling pigeons will love it in his sleep. You pause near the reflecting pool where he often sits in the evening, tossing in rose petals and ideas. He's speaking to no one in particular. If they can walk from London to Paris in steel, then they will walk to me in stone. You almost want to believe him. Almost. And yet, as he traces lines in the water with his finger, the empire strains around him. Funds dwindle. Ministers raise eyebrows. And whispers begin. Can the Sultan tell the difference between a bridge and a monument to his own reflection? It's still early in the tale, though. The bridge is only a dream, a line of poetry without a page. But as you follow the Sultan back into his palace of clocks, one thing becomes clear. This isn't about crossing water. It's about defying it. The Sultan sets his sights on Europe. Specifically, a letter to Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew sparks a most unexpected bromance. You're perched now on a polished ottoman in the Sultan's private study, where the scent of rose ink and damp parchment fills the air. The walls are lined with maps, most of them inaccurate, all of them beautiful. One of them has Constantinople circled in gold leaf, and just beneath it, in delicate Ottoman script, a phrase meaning the center of the world. But lately, the Sultan's gaze keeps drifting west. Past Vienna, past Berlin, all the way to Paris. More precisely, to the office of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of that Bonaparte, and currently the self-proclaimed president, soon-to-be emperor, of France. Yes, he's a little shorter than his uncle. Yes, he wears his hair slicked in a manner that suggests he once lost a bet. But to Sultan Abdulmecid, he's something even more interesting, a Western ruler who might get it. And so, a letter is drafted. It's not a dry diplomatic memo. It's a borderline love note, with tasteful flourishes, obviously. The Sultan writes a vision, of architecture, of the need for East and West to meet not in war, but in wonder. He even includes a gift, an engraved snuff box, if you're curious, with a miniature painting of the Bosphorus inside the lid. And just like that, history tilts on its axis. Louis Napoleon, who adores grand ideas and even grander illusions of himself, eats it up. He writes back in florid French, comparing the Sultan's bridge idea to the arches of the heavens. A bromantic exchange begins, one that would fuel several awkward diplomatic functions, a very confusing attempt to co-write a poem, and, somehow, the resurfacing of a name long buried in Italian soil. Leonardo da Vinci. See, somewhere in his archives, Louis Napoleon's staff digs up an old architectural sketch. Not just any sketch. It's the sketch. A bridge design proposed by da Vinci back in 1502, for, wait for it, an earlier sultan who never used it. The drawing shows a sleek, impossibly long span with no supporting piers in the water, like a stone bird stretching its wings across a wide channel. You glance at it. It looks unbuildable, but undeniably beautiful. Like something out of a dream you half remember after a fever nap. The current sultan is ecstatic. Historians still argue whether this exchange was sincere diplomacy or an elaborate way for Louis Napoleon to distract the sultan from forming closer ties with Britain or Russia. But you see it differently. You see two men, each obsessed with legacy, both allergic to criticism, falling headfirst into a delusion of shared destiny. One wants to revive the glory of Rome, the other wants to reinvent Byzantium with better lighting. At a candlelit reception weeks later, the French ambassador reads Louis Napoleon's letter aloud to the Ottoman court. The phrase "un pas immortal" echoes through the marble halls. Musicians strike up a rendition of something vaguely triumphant. And the Sultan, beaming, near tears, lifts his glass and declares, "Then we shall build what even time dares not cross." That quote, by the way, ends up carved in 12 places across the eventual construction site. Only 3 of those carvings survive, and one is currently home to a family of exceptionally sassy pigeons. Back at court, the Da Vinci design is treated like a sacred text. Architects huddle over it. Translators squint at the Italian notes, trying to interpret 400-year-old doodles and side comments like, "This part, maybe with ropes?" Some engineers applaud the ambition. Others look for a nearby exit. The Da Vinci Bridge becomes a blueprint not just for architecture but for political theater. The Sultan orders the plans redrawn with Ottoman flourishes. That includes decorative turrets, minaret-style arches, and, just for flair, a built-in coffee pavilion halfway across the span. You shake your head, half smiling, because somewhere in this strange entanglement of politics and performance, something rare is happening. An idea is being treated like an heirloom. Not just dusted off, but polished, worshipped, and, most dangerously, believed in. Oh, and here's your fringe tidbit for the night. The Sultan briefly considers hiring a team of Parisian opera set designers to consult on the bridge's aesthetics. Yes, actual theater people. One of them reportedly asked if the structure would be more of a tragedy or a comedy. Still undecided. You peer through a lattice window and see sketches, tools, and couriers fanning out into the city. The machinery of empire creaks into motion. A letter from one emperor-in-waiting to another has snowballed into blueprints, budgets, and whispered promises. But what you also notice, what you can't not notice, is that no one seems to be asking why. Why this bridge? Now? Why this location? Why this expense, when the empire is bleeding in half a dozen directions? Those questions will come, of course. They always do. But for now, you float in a gilded echo chamber of praise, ambition, and selective hearing. The Sultan sets down his quill on sighs. They'll remember us, he says to no one in particular. Even if the bridge never touches ground, you have a feeling he's more right than he knows. You sit in on a lavish Ottoman banquet where a bridge first leaps from wine-fueled conversation into geopolitical absurdity. The scent of roasted lamb, orange blossoms, and cloves hits you before you even enter the chamber. You're barefoot, of course, that's the rule when entering a palace dining hall this sacred. Your footsteps fall soft on carpets that probably cost more than your apartment. Overhead, candlelight drips gold onto crystal goblets, and the silk canopy ripples ever so slightly with the breeze from the Bosphorus. Tonight is not just a dinner. It's a declaration. The Sultan is entertaining a royal delegation from France, plus a few carefully selected merchants, poets, and one Italian engineer who's mostly here because he happened to be holding the right napkin during a prior conversation. You settle onto a low-cushioned divan as the servants sweep in like a dance troupe, every dish more elaborate than the last. Steamed pomegranate quail, jeweled rice, sorbet frozen inside tiny brass sculptures shaped like lions. The Sultan, naturally, eats almost nothing. Power does that to a man's appetite. Glasses clink. Laughter rings like bells dipped in rosewater. A French dignitary, red-cheeked and riding a wave of syrupy Ottoman wine, leans across the table and raises a question, not quite a toast, but not quite a joke either. So, is it true then? You'll be building the world's longest bridge over a stream no one's bothered to cross? The room stills for half a second. And then the Sultan smiles. It's the smile of someone who has decided not to be offended, but rather, fatally inspired. He rises, swishing his robes behind him like he's trailing his own theme music, and lifts a goblet high into the air. Not just a bridge, he says, voice warm with charm and cinnamon. A spine between continents. A gesture so bold that time itself will be forced to pause. You bite your tongue. Several guests do. The Sultan's metaphors have gotten increasingly poetic lately, which is what happens when your inner circle includes more calligraphers than engineers. He continues, describing how this bridge will symbolize the friendship between East and West, between Islam and Christianity, between empires destined to be immortal as long as they occasionally exchange decorative rugs and very pointed glances. Someone mentions that ferries work just fine. Another, perhaps a little too loudly, suggests balloons would be cheaper. But Abdulmecid is on a roll. He talks of Da Vinci's design, which he now describes as the skeleton of heaven. He sketches in the air with his fingers, arches, spines, pathways lit by moonlight. Somewhere, a poet dabs tears with a napkin. You reach for more lamb. Then it gets weirder. He proposes that the bridge be scented. Not metaphorically. He wants trays of jasmine and sandalwood hidden in its undercarriage so that those who cross it shall breathe peace. A Frenchman coughs wine into his sleeve. But the Sultan means it. You can tell. The conversation drifts from design to destiny. A vizier tries, very gently, to ask how this might be funded. The Sultan waves the question away with the ease of a man who's never balanced a checkbook in his life. Funds appear when greatness demands them, he says. Historians still argue whether this dinner marked the official launch of the project or was just the fevered crescendo of a long-simmering obsession. Some say the Sultan only went forward because the French delegation clapped. Others blame the wine, which had been laced with apricot brandy and something called Camel's Whisper. But one thing's certain, the next day, the first official orders are signed. Blueprints are copied. Engineers are summoned. A man is paid, handsomely, to research whether it's possible to make stone that smells like lavender. Here's a quirky footnote. One guest, an aging Greek merchant with an allergy to figs, later claimed he sneezed right as the Sultan declared the bridge's name, causing the word harmony to be misheard as heresy by a junior scribe. The resulting misprint in court records led to 3 weeks of mild panic before the correct title was restored. You watch as the party stretches into the early morning hours. Musicians take turns improvising a song about the bridge. It features at least 2 metaphors involving eagles and one very confused reference to Atlantis. By sunrise, several guests are asleep on cushions, and the Sultan is still talking to a French colonel about whether the bridge should reflect the stars or challenge them. There's a weightlessness to the moment, a drunken, dreamy sense that anything is possible when you say it loud enough over dessert. You can almost feel the bridge start to take shape, suspended not above water, but above reason. Before you leave the room, you hear one last exchange. A servant leans in to ask, quietly, whether the bridge will be open to the public. The Sultan furrows his brow. "What a strange question," he says. "It will be visible to everyone." Which, you realize, is not exactly the same thing. You step out onto the balcony, watching the sky shift from rose to gold. The waters of the Golden Horn glimmer beneath you, quiet, unsuspecting, still unbridged, still patient. But now they've been insulted. A legendary design from none other than Leonardo da Vinci makes a bizarre posthumous cameo, and gets uncomfortably literal. The air smells like damp vellum and nervous optimism. You're deep inside the Imperial Archives now, surrounded by a flurry of activity. Scribes, engineers, and one man inexplicably holding a tray of dates swarm around a table where drawing rests under glass, reverently lit by sunlight filtered through stained glass. It's the Da Vinci sketch. Thin, faded lines. Curved like a swan's neck. Elegant. Impossible. It was originally proposed in 1502 for Sultan Bayezid II, who, to his credit, took one look at Leonardo's revolutionary single-span bridge and thought, absolutely not. Too new. Too wild. Too physics-defying. The idea was politely declined and quietly shelved. But now, over 3 centuries later, Leonardo's design has been resurrected like a Renaissance ghost, and Sultan Abdulmecid is convinced its destiny. You lean in and trace the lines with your eyes, no vertical supports, no intermediary piers. Just a bold curve leaping across the water like a myth-made stone. Of course, Da Vinci never built this thing. He just imagined it. But for a sultan more interested in symbolism than logistics, that's more than enough. "Let's build it exactly as he drew it," the Sultan says, brushing aside a very sweaty engineer's concerns. "But your Majesty," the man replies, "there's no math." "Ah," says the Sultan, "but there's poetry." You close your eyes for a moment and count to 10. When you open them, you realize the project is now fully underway, and its design is being treated like sacred scripture. Historians still argue whether the Da Vinci sketch was chosen for its artistic merit, its novelty, or because it let the Sultan say he had something co-designed by Leonardo himself. Either way, the bridge's final blueprints are a strange hybrid, half Renaissance dream, half Ottoman embellishment, and fully detached from reality. You follow a small delegation as they carry copies of the drawing to a workshop just outside the palace grounds. Artisans and builders gather around as if about to witness a miracle or a disaster. There's a heated debate about whether the bridge should include decorative fountains at each end. The Sultan insists on one with birds that spout mist so the air shall taste like paradise. The engineers are not okay. Still, they try. They calculate. They stretch ropes and measure terrain. A French advisor gestures to a slope and mutters something that might mean career suicide. One bold soul suggests reducing the curve's height for stability, only to be exiled to provincial road repair duty. And here comes the quirky tidbit: an enterprising apprentice carves a tiny model of the bridge out of stale baklava to test its structural shape. It promptly collapses under the weight of a walnut, which someone records as an ill omen. The model is eaten to destroy the evidence. But the Sultan isn't backing down. If Leonardo could dream it, he believes, then surely the empire can build it. Even if nobody really understands the scale, or the cost, or the laws of physics, apparently. Materials are ordered. Massive quantities of stone, shipped from quarries so distant that the transport alone eats through a chunk of the annual military budget. Architects are summoned, dismissed, then summoned again when it turns out no one else can read Da Vinci's handwriting. A team of translators is hired to decipher the annotations around the drawing. The result is interpretive, at best. One line reads, "Support must flow like the wind beneath the ark," which is either a poetic metaphor or the reason the entire support system is left out. You stand in the dusty courtyard as work begins on a scale prototype. It leans slightly to the left, and to the right, and eventually just gives up and lies flat like a napping turtle. The Sultan visits it anyway and declares it magnificent in spirit. No one dares disagree. A group of French engineers, sent as a gesture of goodwill by Louis Napoleon, arrive and are horrified. One of them reportedly asks if the entire bridge will be built out of wishful thinking and divine intention. He is promptly reassigned to tea-sipping duty. Despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, the Sultan remains deeply, irrationally invested. He orders a fresco of the bridge painted across his study ceiling. He commissions a lute concerto titled Bridge of Light, and he insists his court poet write a 22-stanza epic beginning with the line, "From sketch to sky, the ark shall fly." Spoiler, it does not fly. Not yet, anyway. But you can feel the wheels turning. The empire is pouring coin, labor, and marble into something that still only exists on parchment and in the imagination of a ruler who sees no difference between vision and blueprint. You wonder how many palaces could have been repaired, how many roads paved, how many soldiers properly outfitted, if not for this architectural fever dream. Still, as you walk past a row of chiseling stonemasons working by lamplight, there's a part of you that gets it. Da Vinci dared to imagine something impossible. And the Sultan, blessed or cursed by timing and ego, dares to believe he can pull it off. The water below is still waiting. Quiet. Patient. Unimpressed. But something's coming. Something shaped like a dream. And possibly held together with arrogance and prayer. You trace the imagined superhighway of sultanic ambition. No tolls, no camels, just wild delusion over water. You're gliding now, not on a boat, but across a parchment so wide it takes 4 scribes to unroll it. It's the official imperial map of the Sultan's grand infrastructural vision. You hover over it, like a bird, watching lines spread from Constantinople like veins from a golden heart. The bridge is just the start. From its endpoint, roads fan outward in all directions, to Bursa, to Edirne, to the deserts that flirt with Syria, and all the way to Cairo, like a thread pulled tight across the empire's sagging skin. It's not a road network, it's a nervous system designed by someone who drank too much rose sherbet and read too many epic poems. The Sultan gestures with a silver pointer. "Here," he says, tapping near Ankara. "We'll have a rest station. Marble fountains. Shaded gardens. No camels allowed, just carriages and walking philosophers." You blink. Philosophers? Yes, he continues, as if that needs no further explanation. Travelers must arrive enlightened, or at least smelling of mint. Here it is, the Sultan's ultimate dream. Not just a bridge. A seamless path from Europe to Africa, from silk-robed Istanbulites to linen-draped Nubians. A stone artery uniting the empire, crossing rivers, deserts, and reason itself. The term no tolls is repeated often, though nobody can figure out who's paying for it. Historians still argue whether this was ever a genuine plan or just a decorative delusion. Was it strategy or pageantry? A way to signal imperial strength? Or a form of geographic fanfiction? Ottoman tax records suggest funds were allocated, but none can confirm whether these roads extended much beyond already existing dirt paths, many of which were, at the time, more goat trail than highway. But the Sultan isn't concerned with terrain. He's concerned with vision. He wants every village to see itself reflected in the imperial mirror. He wants traders to glide on polished stone. He wants pilgrims to pause beneath olive trees while reading poetry inscribed into benches. And so, the bridge becomes more than a bridge. It's the cornerstone of a utopian traffic fantasy. You travel along the imaginary route with the court's planning committee. It's hot, the maps are heavy, and the architect in charge keeps fainting into his own chalk. They pass through towns that don't yet know they've been selected for transformation. Peasants glance up from their plows as the committee trots by, all silks and feathers and folding stools. In one village, a man holding a chicken is asked if he can envision a future bazaar here. He nods slowly, then sells the chicken to an official who mishears the price by a factor of 10. And now, your fringe tidbit, One enthusiastic advisor suggested the new road system be infused with rose oil to perfume the empire's breath. The trial run resulted in several oxen refusing to walk on the scented stones, and one cartload of peaches becoming inedibly floral. Meanwhile, back in the palace, models of the proposed route fill an entire room. Miniature aqueducts, statues, and unnecessary garden pavilions dot a landscape of imported Italian moss. The Sultan visits daily, moving tiny carts with his fingers like a child at play. He even holds ceremonies. One includes a dove release, which goes awkwardly when the doves immediately fly west, into a storm. Another involves a royal proclamation titled The March of Harmony, in which he reads aloud his hopes for a borderless Ottoman experience, where no man shall be stopped, except by good conversation. One scribe later summarizes the entire event as bold, if untethered. Of course, the practical folk try to interject. An old vizier with a limp from a previous bridge collapse points out that the empire's current roads are barely maintained. "Fix what we have before drawing in the clouds," he mutters. He is politely removed from the committee and reassigned to grain storage logistics in Anatolia. A newer, shinier committee forms, one that doesn't ask as many questions. They begin creating slogans. One empire, one path. From minaret to pyramid. Ottomans move like water. That last one is quickly dropped after someone points out water moves downhill and occasionally floods things. And still, the Sultan dreams. He walks the palace gardens reciting the names of cities that will be linked. He imagines night travel lit by star-shaped lanterns. He asks, during a lull in council, whether the road might play music if you clap twice near a milestone. Everyone claps, just in case. You sit now in a room filled with scrolls, budgets that don't balance, maps that ignore mountain ranges, and cost projections that rely heavily on divine favor. Yet somehow, the vision continues. Because this isn't about infrastructure. It's about performance. It's not a road network. It's a story. A way to write I mattered across land and water in every stubborn province that dared to doubt. And at the heart of it all, like a jeweled buckle clasping continents, the bridge waits. Still unbuilt. Still unreal. But no longer alone. It is now the beginning of everything. Or maybe just a very expensive middle. A solid chunk of the Ottoman Navy facepalms as the Sultan insists on crossing the Bosphorus without using a boat. Ever. You're standing at the edge of the Bosphorus now. The sun is high, the wind smells like salt and roasted chestnuts, and the water glimmers like a secret trying very hard not to be noticed. Seagulls spiral above, waiting for crumbs or drama, both equally common here. Beside you, Ottoman naval officers squint across the water. Some stroke their beards. One sighs audibly. They've just been informed, officially, that the Sultan no longer wishes to rely on boats. For anything. Ever again. Specifically, His Majesty has declared that the age of ferries is over. That bridges are more civilized. That water, while poetic, should not be considered a valid form of transportation if one can instead float atop it in a triumphant arc of imperial stone. You look to your left. 24 perfectly serviceable ships. Crude, rigged, polished to a diplomatic shine. You look to your right. One very proud Sultan standing beside an easel featuring a painting of what appears to be a bridge drawn by someone who's never met physics. This, he says, tapping the canvas, will be our future. No more damp journeys. No more waiting on tides. The Bosphorus shall be crossed in grace. A naval admiral mutters under his breath, but we're the Navy. Historians still argue whether this moment signaled the beginning of the Ottoman naval decline or was simply another hiccup in a long string of maritime neglect. But the symbolic slap lands hard. Your job is obsolete if your boss decides the sea itself should be politely ignored. The Sultan's position is clear. Ferries are old world. They bob. They stink of fish. Sometimes they're late. You'd never see the French emperor waiting for a rowboat. Why should he? One royal advisor proposes an elegant compromise. Build the bridge, yes, but also maintain a small, stylish ferry system as a backup. Why build an umbrella when the sun is eternal? The Sultan replies. You almost admire the man's confidence. The engineers now have a new instruction. No boats, ever, under any circumstances, may serve as part of the official crossing experience. This includes temporary pontoons, floating scaffolds, or even construction barges. The bridge must be built from land to land, no cheating. The water is to be treated as if it were lava. beautiful, treacherous, boat-repelling lava. One naval captain, clearly fed up, offers to carry the Sultan across the Bosphorus on his back just to make a point. He is assigned to lighthouse duty on an island no one visits. Meanwhile, a French naval attaché writes home describing the whole situation as delightfully Byzantine, which is diplomat speak for "this is chaos and I love it." Back at the docks, confusion reigns. Port workers begin repurposing ferry docks for other things, makeshift marketplaces, fish drying racks, and once, briefly, an outdoor wrestling ring. There's a rumor, never confirmed, that one ferry was turned into a floating tea salon before sinking under the weight of irony. And here's your quirky tidbit. In protest of the Sultan's no-boat policy, a group of fishermen staged a mock regatta where all the boats were made of reeds and powered entirely by offended stares. They made it 30 feet before tipping over. The Sultan watched from a gazebo and applauded politely. Still, the logistics grow trickier. Supplies must now be dragged around the long way. Workers build absurd detours just to respect the no contact with water clause. A marble shipment takes 3 extra weeks because it's rerouted overland through sheep territory. The sheep are not pleased. And all the while, the Sultan remains committed. He starts signing his letters with a new title, Guardian of the Unbroken Crossing. He asks palace musicians to compose a navyless march. And he hosts a tea ceremony where he names each of the bridge's intended arches after virtues like patience, dignity, and not boat. You think he's joking until you see the official list. Historians will later question his motives. Was this an anti-naval statement? A public assertion of his control over an empire increasingly ruled by foreign influence? Or just an eccentric man doubling down because no one told him no soon enough? You walk along the shore now, stepping over abandoned mooring lines and coils of rope with no purpose. The harbor is eerily quiet. Ships still float nearby, but there's a tension in the air, as if even the gulls sense that something fundamental has been broken. And then, one morning, the Sultan appears on the construction site. He looks across the Bosphorus, then turns to his entourage. "When I am gone," he says, "this shall be the road they take to remember me." You suspect he means it literally. The officers behind him bow, the ministers murmur, and the naval representatives shuffle uncomfortably. And somewhere across the water, an old ferry creaks softly, like it's laughing. The age of sails, at least here, is on pause. And the bridge? The bridge is still just a dream with scaffolding. But that dream now has a sworn enemy, the boat. You witness the surreal logistics of construction, elephants, foreign engineers, and the mysterious absence of anything resembling common sense. The first stone arrives like a celebrity at the palace gates, preceded by a fanfare of trumpets, the scent of jasmine, and a herd of elephants. Yes, elephants. Not because they're particularly good at stone hauling, but because the Sultan insisted on them. Majestic and unyielding, he said. They shall symbolize the empire's strength. You watch as the massive beasts lumber awkwardly through the cobblestone streets, trunks swaying like they're auditioning for a dance troupe. Their mahouts, dressed in silk, urge them on with whispered commands and occasional whacks from ornamental sticks. It's equal parts spectacle and logistical nightmare. Meanwhile, foreign engineers arrive, fresh from Europe's burgeoning industrial hubs, blinking in the Ottoman sun and clutching blueprints that look more like cryptic puzzles. They're quickly introduced to the Sultan's unique construction philosophy, one where common sense is treated like a guest who showed up uninvited to a royal ball. The engineers are given grand titles, elaborate robes, and a bewildering array of responsibilities that shift daily. One morning, you overhear a French engineer instructed to design arches that sing in the wind. By afternoon, the same engineer is sent to oversee elephant feeding schedules. You wander through the sprawling construction site, a sprawling chaos of piles of stone, unfinished scaffolding, and workers who look equally confused and exhausted. The air smells of fresh-cut timber, dust, and the faint tang of rosewater, a royal insistence that every task smell imperial. One peculiar scene unfolds near the water's edge, a group of Ottoman masons arguing heatedly with a Scottish surveyor over whether a particular foundation stone should face north or the direction of the Sultan's favorite moon. The debate lasts all morning. You place your bets on the moon. In a shady corner, you find a small tent where local architects and engineers attempt to reverse engineer Da Vinci's plans. The process involves more guesswork than geometry and several bottles of strong coffee. You spot one grizzled engineer scribbling notes titled "How to Build a Bridge Without Physics." Your fringe tidbit, At one point, an entire day's labor is lost when the elephants, spooked by a stray cat, trample a newly constructed stone arch. The royal reaction? A decree banning cats within a mile of the site. This remains in effect until a particularly persistent tabby is smuggled and disguised as a stray piece of cloth. Despite these absurd setbacks, construction trudges forward, fueled by a mixture of imperial pride, confusion, and sheer stubbornness. You notice the workers' spirits fluctuate, sometimes hopeful, sometimes resigned, occasionally amused by the Sultan's latest whims, such as ordering lanterns shaped like tulips to line the bridge. Historians still debate whether this construction phase was a visionary act of engineering bravado or an elaborate exercise in futility. You suspect a little bit of both. As you watch the elephants lumber away, you can't help but marvel at the sheer spectacle. Here, in the middle of the Ottoman Empire, an ambitious, and possibly deluded, project is unfolding. One where the might of ancient beasts, foreign expertise, and royal whimsy collide in a slow-motion dance. The bridge isn't just a structure. It's a circus. And the ringmaster? Sultan Abdulmecid himself. Turns out, you can't build a bridge on pudding. Engineers revolt, architects resign, and one unlucky camel goes missing forever. The scene shifts to the shoreline where the ambitious bridge is supposed to rise, but instead, you find yourself in something resembling a marshland masquerading as a construction site. The ground squelches underfoot like a poorly made jelly, and every step feels like the earth itself is quietly rejecting the Sultan's grand idea. You watch as engineers stomp, measure, and furrow their brows in unison. This soil, one grumbles, is less foundation and more quagmire. Another mutters about settlement rates and bearing capacities, terms that sound like curses. Despite their expertise, the Sultan's insistence on a specific location, right over this swampy stretch, creates a nightmare of instability. Foundations sink like forgotten dreams. Stones tilt drunkenly, and support piles begin to wobble before they're even set. One senior engineer, probably near his breaking point, ceremoniously submits his resignation. It's immediately ignored. Another engineer stages a silent protest by refusing to attend meetings unless offered stronger coffee. The palace obliges. A rumor spreads. The Sultan's favorite camel has disappeared. Last seen near the mudflats, it's speculated the animal tried to cross the unstable ground, sank up to its knees, and was never seen again. It quickly becomes a whispered cautionary tale among the workers, who start calling the marsh the camel's grave. You stroll past the quagmire, noticing small wooden platforms used to ferry workers across the worst patches. The platforms creak ominously. A carpenter jokes that the bridge's nickname should be the Great Floating Mud Pie. Despite these challenges, the Sultan remains undeterred. He orders the construction of drainage ditches to convince the earth to be firm, and commands that piles of stone be dumped in hopes that weight alone will coax the mud into submission. Historians still argue whether the Sultan's decision to build here was due to strategic importance or a stubborn refusal to adapt plans in light of reality. Some believe it was a symbolic gesture, crossing the mud of doubt as a metaphor for the empire's challenges. Others think it was simply poor surveying. Amid the chaos, a quirky tidbit, a local herbalist is hired to sprinkle a mysterious concoction over the site, claimed to harden the soil's spirit. It's made from crushed spices and ground stones. No one knows if it helped, but it smelled fantastic, which is something. Meanwhile, the workforce grows restless. There are whispers of mutiny, although none quite brave enough to voice it outright. Workers joke that the bridge is less a construction and more a swamp-themed amusement park attraction. One particularly exhausted mason is caught on camera balancing a stone block while half asleep. His comment the next day? If the Sultan wanted art, he should have asked for a painting, not a sinking bridge. You watch as another foundation pile suddenly tilts sideways, taking an entire section with it. The collapse is gentle, like a domino made of marshmallows. The Sultan, upon hearing the news, reportedly smiled and said, "Even the earth resists greatness at first." You can't help but wonder if the bridge is less a crossing and more a monument to persistence. Or perhaps folly. Sometimes, the line blurs. Whatever the case, this soggy chapter in the saga sets the tone. You can't just build a bridge on pudding, no matter how much imperial will you pour into it. And so, the bridge stands, or rather, sinks, at the edge of empire and reason, waiting for the next act. The politics heat up as advisors whisper treason, and the bridge project becomes a lightning rod for empire-wide unrest. The palace halls feel tighter now. You can almost hear the whispers curling through the marble corridors like smoke. Wasteful, they say. Foolish. An affront to tradition. Behind closed doors, ministers exchange glances that say, this bridge might be the final straw. Sultan Abdulmecid sits in his audience chamber, still draped in silks, but the air around him crackles with tension. His closest advisors hesitate when the bridge comes up in conversation, careful not to offend the man whose word is law, yet desperate to pull him back from the edge of ruin. One veteran vizier, once the Sultan's mentor, approaches the subject delicately. Your Majesty, the empire's coffers run thin. The people grow restless. Perhaps, we might pause the bridge? The Sultan's eyes flash. Pause? I build for eternity, not for the fleeting patience of men. The vizier retreats, murmuring to other courtiers that the Sultan is lost in stone. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets below, unrest simmers. Traders grumble over raised taxes, soldiers complain about unpaid wages, and peasants whisper about distant battles that feel closer with every bridge stone laid. The bridge project becomes a symbol, not of progress, but of imperial overreach. Political factions form around it. Some argue it embodies the empire's renewal, others see it as a distraction from crises both internal and external. Historians still debate whether the bridge's controversial funding contributed significantly to the empire's eventual fragmentation. Some suggest it accelerated dissatisfaction, others argue it was merely a symptom of broader decay. You overhear court intrigue as rumors swirl, whispers of treasonous plots, of ministers bribed to sabotage progress, and of foreign agents exploiting the controversy to weaken the Sultan's rule. One particularly dramatic episode involves a leaked letter suggesting some nobles conspired to halt the project by sabotaging supply lines. The palace investigation turns into a theatrical spectacle of accusations and denials, with one noble fainting dramatically at the climax. Amid this turmoil, a quirky tidbit emerges. The Sultan orders all bridge-related correspondence to be written on fragrant paper infused with jasmine, hoping it will calm tempers. The idea backfires when officials begin sneezing uncontrollably during meetings. Tensions rise until a rare public speech from the Sultan seeks to reaffirm his vision. He speaks of unity, of bridges as metaphors for peace, and of a future where no man stands divided by water or fear. His words are poetic, but the crowd outside remains skeptical. You feel the strain of empire reflected in every cracked wall, every furrowed brow, every whispered conversation in shadowed alcoves. The bridge, once a symbol of hope, now teeters as a lightning rod for unrest. And as the political storm gathers, you realize the Sultan's grand design might be his empire's undoing, or its last, desperate hope. Paris chuckles. Vienna snickers. The Sultan responds by tripling the budget and banning the word impractical. You find yourself now in the smoky salons of Europe, where diplomats and aristocrats sip claret and exchange smirks about the Sultan's ambitious bridge. The news has crossed continents like wildfire, spreading through Parisian cafes and Viennese court gossip circles with equal parts amusement and disbelief. Have you heard? A French nobleman says, swirling his wine. The Ottoman Sultan plans to span a channel with a bridge so grand it's practically a folly on stilts. A Viennese count snorts. It's less a bridge and more a vanity project powered by stubbornness and rosewater. You can almost hear the laughter, polite, condescending, and a bit cruel. The bridge becomes a joke, a symbol of Ottoman eccentricity, and a favorite anecdote among European satirists. Back in Constantinople, word of these jabs reaches the palace. Instead of retreating, Sultan Abdulmecid does something unexpected. He doubles, no, triples the project's budget. He declares that impractical is a forbidden word in his court. Anyone uttering it risks exile or worse, a tedious appointment as royal pastry taster. The engineers and architects, now flush with funds but struggling with the impossible design, find themselves caught in a whirlwind of resources and demands. Marble flows like water, artisans work day and night, and the bridge's specifications grow ever more elaborate. You witness the arrival of exotic materials from across the empire, Italian marble, Syrian cedar, Persian tiles, all converging at the construction site. The bridge begins to resemble a palace more than a pathway. Historians still argue whether this budget increase was a political move to assert Ottoman prestige or a stubborn refusal to admit failure. Some suggest the Sultan saw European mockery as a challenge rather than criticism, fueling his determination. Amid the frenzy, a quirky tidbit, the Sultan commissions an enormous golden crescent to crown the bridge's highest arch. The artisan tasked with creating it nearly loses his mind trying to make it both sturdy and luminous. The crescent is so heavy it causes structural concerns, but the Sultan insists it remain. Meanwhile, foreign diplomats struggle to keep a straight face during official tours of the site. A British envoy famously quips that the bridge might be the longest way to nowhere, but it's certainly the most expensive. The Sultan's response is diplomatic yet firm: let them laugh. History is written by those who build. You sense a shift in mood. The bridge is no longer just an infrastructure project. It is now a statement, an imperial dare flung across the water to Europe's skeptical eyes. And the empire, with all its challenges, rallies behind this towering symbol of ambition, or at least the idea of it. You watch as workers lay stone after stone beneath the sun, the golden crescent gleaming like a stubborn star. Because sometimes, pride is the strongest foundation of all. You follow the trail of stripped palaces and empty quarries as the bridge devours the empire's luxury reserves. The empire's grandeur is on display, but behind the scenes, the cost of ambition is bleeding it dry. You walk through quarries once quiet and now roaring with the noise of endless stone extraction. Mountains are being hollowed, forests felled, and marble shipments sent flying across land and sea. You pass abandoned royal gardens, emptied of their statues and fountains, repurposed to fuel the bridge's insatiable hunger for marble and timber. Palatial rooms are stripped of their marble tiles, replaced with cheaper alternatives, as the Sultan's engineers requisition every resource they can find. The treasury groans under the weight of the project. Gold that once lined palace walls now lies in the hands of quarrymen, sailors, and masons. Historians still argue whether this resource drain contributed significantly to the empire's weakening or if it was a calculated sacrifice for lasting glory. Regardless, the luxury that once defined the Sultan's court is quietly vanishing. A quirky detail: courtiers begin joking that the Sultan is building a bridge with the stones of his ancestors' bathrooms, and the joke spreads so widely that palace servants overhear it and burst into giggles behind closed doors. As the months pass, whispers of financial strain reach the ears of foreign merchants, who start demanding higher tariffs, sensing the empire's vulnerability. Yet the Sultan remains undeterred, issuing edicts to speed up stone shipments and banning any distractions from bridge-related work. You watch a caravan depart with blocks of marble the size of small cottages, elephants hauling them through rugged terrain, dust rising in swirling clouds. At one remote quarry, workers carve inscriptions dedicating the stone to the Bridge of Eternal Harmony, even as their hands grow calloused and their bodies weary. Back in the city, the bridge's skeleton rises slowly, each arch a monument to both skill and exhaustion. And as the empire's riches drain away, you realize the bridge is more than stone and ambition, it is a ledger written in sacrifice. A ledger the empire may soon be unable to balance. The foundations are laid, but only at low tide, and only when the Sultan is watching from a gold-plated gazebo. You find yourself on the banks of the Bosphorus again, where construction grinds forward with the stubbornness of a mule and the precision of a royal decree. Workers shuffle back and forth on slippery mudflats, hauling stones and timber in carefully timed rituals. The catch? The foundations can only be laid during low tide. This tidal constraint turns building into a game of patience and frustration. Work halts as the water rises, swallowing half-finished pillars like a greedy sea monster. And the Sultan insists on watching every low-tide session from a specially constructed gazebo gilded in gold leaf, draped with silk curtains, and staffed by attendants offering rosewater and sweetmeats. You watch as the Sultan reclines on cushions, sipping tea and nodding approvingly when a foundation stone is set. He claps when a pile withstands the incoming tide. One engineer comments dryly that the bridge's progress resembles a fancy tea party interrupted by the sea. Historians still debate whether this insistence on personal oversight slowed construction or provided much-needed morale. Some suggest it was the Sultan's way of physically connecting with the project. Others see it as a sign of micromanagement bordering on obsession. Meanwhile, workers joke that the gazebo is the only place on the entire site that never gets muddy. A quirky tidbit: the Sultan commissions an intricate water clock to be installed in the gazebo, designed to signal the exact moment of low tide with a musical chime. Unfortunately, it malfunctions and chimes every hour instead, confusing both the workers and the Sultan's courtiers. You watch tides come and go, pillars rise and fall, and the Sultan's golden gaze remained fixed on the water's edge. The bridge grows, slowly, as if reluctant to leave the sea's embrace. And you realize, the Empire's fate feels just as tied to these tides, unpredictable, inevitable, and utterly beyond control. One pillar stands. Just one. And yet it manages to trigger dozens of property disputes, 2 rebellions, and a very confused goat. You stand before the solitary stone pillar rising defiantly from the muddy banks of the Bosphorus. It's not tall. It's not impressive. But it's there, a lonely monument to ambition, stubbornness, and the Empire's strange dance with destiny. This single pillar quickly becomes a flashpoint for chaos. Landowners of the surrounding areas suddenly realize that their property lines are as blurred as the Sultan's logic. Boundaries shift, maps are redrawn on the backs of napkins, disputes flare hotter than Istanbul's summer sun. One wealthy landowner claims that the pillar's shadow infringes on his prized fig orchard. Another insists that the pillar blocks the view from his mansion's balcony, an offense tantamount to a personal slight. The legal battles are swift and bewildering. You hear tales of endless hearings, each more absurd than the last. At one point, a judge rules that the pillar is a public nuisance but a private tragedy. You find yourself in the middle of a protest led by disgruntled peasants and merchants. They carry signs demanding compensation, chanting slogans that mix traditional grievances with surprisingly poetic references to stone tyranny. Then, the rebellion breaks out. Not a full-scale war, but a sharp flare of unrest that rattles the province and sends shudders through the capital. Rumors swirl that some rebels tried to topple the pillar itself, only to be foiled by a surprisingly aggressive goat that had taken up residence. That goat becomes a legend, lauded in songs and whispered stories as the guardian of the stone. It reportedly bleats loudly at officials and refuses bribes of fresh grass. Historians still debate how much these local disturbances affected the broader stability of the empire. Some say they were symptoms of growing frustration, others think the pillar simply became a convenient scapegoat for larger issues. You catch a curious detail. A satirical pamphlet circulating in Constantinople describes the pillar as the empire's first useless monument and humorously suggests it be moved to a new park called Disappointment Gardens. Despite the turmoil, the Sultan remains proud of his lone pillar. He visits it frequently, leaving offerings of flowers and commissioning artists to paint it under moonlight. You can't help but feel the tragic irony. One stone, meant to signify greatness, becomes a symbol of division and absurdity. As the sun sets, you watch the goat amble past the pillar, oblivious to its newfound fame. And you wonder, maybe the goat understands something the empire doesn't. Architectural scholars cringe as the Da Vinci-inspired plans are mutated into something that looks suspiciously like a child's doodle. The bridge project has entered a phase where ambition meets confusion, and you're smack in the middle of a drawing room filled with architects and draftsmen staring at a pile of blueprints. These aren't just any blueprints, they're Da Vinci's original sketches, twisted and retouched so many times that the original elegance is lost beneath layers of Ottoman embellishments and creative liberties. You watch as an elderly architect shakes his head, muttering phrases like structurally unsound and a toddler could do better. His apprentice, a young man with ink-stained fingers, is less diplomatic and doodles a smiling bridge with wings on the margin. The Sultan, meanwhile, demands the bridge be both majestic and whimsical, instructing designers to add towers, arches, and even what he calls flying gardens suspended from cables that don't exist yet. Historians still argue how much of the final design was inspired by Da Vinci's genius and how much was pure imagination. Some suggest the embellishments were meant to blend Ottoman aesthetics with Renaissance innovation. Others claim they were desperate attempts to mask engineering flaws. The engineering team tries to adapt. They debate the feasibility of flying gardens, which involves suspending soil and plants above the water without any known support system. One engineer suggests giant birds might be enlisted to carry them, prompting uncomfortable silence. A quirky tidbit, a court poet writes an ode to the Bridge of Blossoms, imagining the suspended gardens as a paradise where lovers meet mid-span. The poem becomes popular despite no one knowing if the gardens will ever exist. You glimpse a heated argument between an Italian engineer and an Ottoman courtier about whether the bridge should have a coffeehouse halfway across or a small mosque. The argument ends with a compromise, a coffeehouse mosque, which leaves everyone slightly confused but entertained. The blueprints pile higher, each more fantastical than the last. You start to wonder if the bridge is less an engineering project and more a canvas for court theatrics. As workers struggle to interpret the drawings, mistakes multiply. Pillars are misaligned, arches too steep, and support cables mysteriously omitted. You hear rumors that some builders have resorted to gut feelings and ancient superstitions to guide their work, including nightly offerings to the river spirits. Despite the chaos, the Sultan is pleased. He tours the site with a broad smile, convinced the bridge will be remembered not just for its function, but for its beauty and audacity. You feel a mixture of admiration and dread. This bridge, inspired by a Renaissance master, is morphing into something uniquely Ottoman, a dream draped in silk and stitched with fantasy. And somewhere beneath the ornate flourishes, you wonder if it will ever stand. A freak storm washes away half the progress, and possibly the Sultan's last remaining grasp on reality. The day dawns dark and heavy, the sky bruised with angry clouds. You stand on the shoreline, feeling the electric charge in the air as wind picks up, tugging at your cloak and whipping the Bosphorus into a restless frenzy. The water, usually calm and teasing, churns with a fury that feels almost personal. The construction site is chaos. Timber scaffolds creak and groan, stones wobble precariously, and workers scramble to secure what they can. Elephants panic, their massive feet pounding against the earth like drums of doom. You watch as the storm breaks with sudden violence. Sheets of rain slam down, drenching the land and washing away half the carefully laid foundations. The bridge's fragile arches crumble under the onslaught, tumbling into the dark, hungry water below. One of the lead engineers collapses onto his knees, sodden and speechless. Another curses the heavens and wonders aloud if the Sultan has invited disaster by ignoring the warnings of local elders about the angry waters. Historians still argue whether the storm was an unlucky natural event or a symbolic reckoning for imperial hubris. Some say it marked a turning point, sapping momentum and morale. Others see it as a catalyst that exposed the project's fragility. The Sultan, meanwhile, refuses to be dissuaded. Reports say he paced his chambers that night, muttering to himself about rebuilding stronger than ever. He commands new rounds of construction, doubling down as if defying the storm will erase the damage. A quirky tidbit: after the storm, a palace astrologer claims the weather was caused by bridge spirits offended by misplaced stones, leading to a brief and expensive ritual involving incense, dancing dervishes, and the sacrifice of a particularly confused rooster. The storm becomes a legend. Psalms are written, some mournful, some mocking, about the day the skies opened and the empire's dreams almost drowned. You see workers trudging through mud, eyes hollow but hands determined. The riverbanks are littered with debris, and the site smells of wet earth and broken hopes. Amid the destruction, the Sultan's golden gazebo stands untouched, an island of calm amidst the ruin. You wonder if it's a symbol of resilience or stubborn denial. The empire itself feels shaken, caught between progress and collapse, between dream and reality. And you realize that sometimes, nature has the final say. The bridge, battered but unbroken, waits for the next chapter. You tiptoe through the rotting planks and bird-infested arches of the half-built bridge, now repurposed as a fish market. The morning fog drapes over the remains of the bridge like a faded veil, softening edges that once promised grandeur but now whisper of neglect. You step cautiously onto the wooden planks, many warped or missing, creaking beneath your weight as if protesting your intrusion. Seagulls and cormorants will overhead, their cries mingling with the salty tang of the sea. The bridge's stone arches, once meant to span proudly, now cradle fishermen's stalls, nets drying in the sun, and barrels brimming with the catch of the day. The smell of brine and fresh fish mingles with the faint aroma of jasmine, a ghost of the Sultan's rosewater dreams. You wander past vendors shouting their prices in a mix of Turkish, Greek, and Italian, their voices bouncing off the moss-covered stones. An old man leans against a pillar, grinning as he recounts tales of the bridge that almost was, complete with exaggerated stories of Sultan Abdulmecit's stubbornness and the elephant cavalcade. Historians still argue whether the bridge was ever close to completion or if it was doomed from the start by political turmoil and engineering challenges. What's clear is that the structure, or what remains of it, has found a second life in the city's vibrant fish market. A quirky tidbit: local children play a game called Bridge Ghost, darting between the remaining stone piers, pretending to be spirits guarding the Sultan's unfinished dream. They dare each other to touch the haunted pillar, a lone column rumored to be cursed by a Sultan's jealous vizier. You pause to watch a pelican dive gracefully into the water, snatching a fish from the shimmering waves. It then perches atop a pillar, wings outstretched like the bridge's long-forgotten arches. Walking back toward shore, you notice a faded inscription carved into the stone, part of a poem praising the bridge's promise to unite hearts. The words are worn, almost illegible, but their sentiment lingers like a whisper on the breeze. As the sun rises higher, the bridge remains a paradox, a testament to ambition, folly, and the resilience of a city that adapts and thrives amid ruins. You step off the planks, feeling the gentle sway beneath your feet, and wonder what stories the Bosphorus will carry next. The Sultan dies. Not a single cart has ever crossed his masterpiece. His heirs quietly start calling it the Big Embarrassment. You stand in the shadow of a fading empire, where the once proud Sultan Abdulmecid has passed into history. His reign, marked by dreams as vast as the Bosphorus, ends quietly, without fanfare, without the grand unveiling of his bridge. The unfinished structure looms behind you like a forgotten promise, its stone arches crumbling, wooden planks sagging under the weight of time and neglect. Not a single cart, not a single traveler, has ever used the bridge for its intended purpose. Inside the palace, the mood is subdued. His heirs, burdened by mounting debts and growing unrest, prefer to whisper about the copper scandale, the bridge scandal. They mockingly call it the Big Embarrassment, a costly folly that haunts their coffers and reputations. Courtiers carefully avoid mentioning the bridge in official correspondence, and some go so far as to order the removal of its images from decorative tapestries. Historians still argue whether the Sultan's death sealed the project's fate or if practical concerns had already doomed it. Regardless, the grand vision fades like a candle's last flicker. A quirky detail, legend says that on the night of the Sultan's death, a flock of birds circled the bridge's highest pillar, their cries sounding eerily like morning chants. Locals began referring to them as the Sultan's ghosts. You wander through the capital's streets, sensing a palpable shift. The empire is fraying, caught between modernization and tradition, glory and decline. The bridge, once a symbol of imperial ambition, becomes a relic of hubris. And as new rulers rise, their eyes fixed on survival rather than spectacle, the bridge is quietly left to the mercy of wind, rain, and memory. You look once more at the water-streaked stones, the silent arches, and wonder, was it always meant to be a monument to what could never be? Centuries pass. The bridge is studied, mocked, and finally revered by a niche group of eccentric Italian bridge hobbyists. The passage of time treats the bridge like an old, peculiar relic, ignored by many, cursed by some, and cherished by a peculiar few. You find yourself in a dusty library in Rome, surrounded by brittle books, faded blueprints, and worn journals filled with sketches and notes from generations of engineers and dreamers. Here, a small but passionate cadre of Italian bridge enthusiasts pore over every detail of the Sultan's unrealized project. They debate the feasibility of Da Vinci's design, the Ottoman's ambitious adaptations, and the quirks that made the bridge infamous. These hobbyists, clad in tweed jackets and thick glasses, meet regularly to discuss and replicate scale models, some built from kits, others painstakingly handcrafted from wood and metal. To outsiders, they might seem eccentric or even obsessive, but to them, the bridge represents a lost chapter of architectural audacity. You overhear one member lament, if only the physics had cooperated, while another counters, it was never meant to be built, but rather to inspire. Historians still argue whether the bridge's enduring allure lies in its audacity or its failure. Some view it as a cautionary tale, others, as a symbol of visionary ambition unrestrained by practicality. A quirky tidbit, one enthusiast group hosts an annual festival where they launch miniature floating replicas of the bridge on lakes, celebrating the dream and poking gentle fun at its impracticality. The event includes a costume contest where participants dress as Da Vinci, Ottoman sultans, and even the infamous construction goat. You watch as the hobbyists discuss the bridge's unique blend of Renaissance artistry and Ottoman flair, admiring how a dream so absurd can capture imagination centuries later. And while the bridge itself remains submerged beneath waves and memory, its story lives on, in whispered conversations, in model-building workshops, and in the hearts of those who dare to dream beyond reason. Because sometimes, the most pointless bridges build the strongest connections. You end where the story began, waves lapping at stone ruins, history's soft exhale, and the strange comfort of ambition undone. Back at the Bosphorus, the water laps gently against the stones, the silent witnesses to a bridge that never truly was. You stand alone now, feeling the cool breeze carrying whispers of centuries past. The air hums softly, filled with the mingling scents of salt, jasmine, and distant spices. The ruins, moss-covered and softened by time, are neither monument nor warning. They are simply reminders that even the grandest visions can be fragile, and sometimes, the greatest legacies are those left unfinished. You run your fingers along a weathered stone, tracing patterns worn smooth by water and wind. This bridge was born of ambition, stubbornness, and a yearning to connect worlds that perhaps were never meant to be bridged. Historians still debate the true purpose of the bridge. Was it a genuine attempt at progress, a symbol of imperial hubris, or a poetic folly? Maybe it was all three. A quirky detail: local fishermen swear that at dawn, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint echo of music, perhaps from the Sultan's long-lost lute concerto, or the imagined songs of birds once planned to inhabit the bridge's gardens. You breathe in deeply, the salty air filling your lungs, and feel a quiet kinship with those who dreamed here. They built a bridge not just of stone, but of hope and stories. As the sun dips low, casting golden hues across the water, you let the history settle like dust on your skin. The bridge's unfinished arches become a metaphor for all the dreams we carry, some realized, some abandoned, all part of the vast, tangled tapestry of human endeavor. Now, as the evening deepens and the Bosphorus whispers its ancient lullaby, you close your eyes and feel the gentle pulse of the past and the present entwined. Ambition may falter, empires may fade, but stories, like this one, flow on forever, carried by the soft, endless tide. Let's slow down now. The sun has set fully, and the world feels softer, quieter. You're wrapped in the calm hush of evening, where every sound is gentle and every thought floats like a feather on the breeze. There's no rush here, just the slow unfolding of time, the soft turning of pages in the story of the bridge that never was. It's okay to feel a little wistful, a little amazed by how a single idea can stretch across centuries and oceans. How human dreams, even the most impractical, leave ripples that reach far beyond their beginnings. Breathe in slowly. Let your thoughts drift to those quiet stones, those unfinished arches, and the Sultan who dared to build something impossible. Imagine the quiet waters of the Bosphorus, shimmering beneath a starlit sky, holding those dreams gently in their embrace. There is comfort in endings that aren't quite endings, in stories that fold back on themselves, leaving space for new dreams to take shape. The bridge may be gone, but the journey, the curiosity, the wonder, remains with you. So, as you settle down tonight, let the past's soft whisper lull you into peaceful rest. Know that ambition, in all its forms, connects us, even across time. Sleep well, and when you wake, the world will be waiting, with new stories to tell. Sweet dreams.